Hello students, this is CA Minouti Jani from Faculty of Business Administration, GLS University. And today we are going to discuss the Indian Contract Act 1872. The law of contract constitutes the most important branch of mercantile law. Why? Because it not only affects trade and commerce, but it also affects everybody. Why? Because knowingly or unknowingly, we all enter in a contract every day in our routine life and we become part of it. The contract is the foundation of the civilized world. This act came into force on the first day of September 1872. What is the scope of this Indian Contract Act? This act deals with the general principles and rules governing contracts. The act is divided into two parts. The first part, that is section 1 to 75, it deals with the general principles of the law of contract. It means it is applicable in all the contracts. While the second part, that is section 124 to 238, it deals with only certain special kinds of contracts like indemnity, guarantee, bailment, pledge, etc. Now, when we talk about contract, two important terms are very important in order to understand what is contract. The first term, that is agreement, and the second term, that is contract. Whether agreement and contract, are they same? No, they are different. Then what is agreement? Every promise and every set of promises forming the consideration for each other is an agreement. Then what is contract? An agreement which is enforceable by law, that is contract. So in simple language, if agreement is enforceable by law, then it turns out to be a contract. Today, we are going to understand what is the definition of contract and what are the essential elements in order to have a valid contract. Section 10 of the Indian Contract Act 1872 has clear-cut given us the definition of a contract. All agreements are contracts. See, here you can see all agreements are contracts if. That means if agreement fulfills certain conditions, then and only then it can be called a contract. And it clearly means that agreement does not mean contract always. Okay, yeah. So once again we are going through the definition. All agreements are contracts if they are made by the free consent of parties. Which parties? Competent to contract. That means if they are by free consent and that also of such parties which are competent parties for a lawful consideration and with a lawful object and are hereby and are not hereby expressly declared to be void. So, this definition clearly indicates certain essential elements which turns out to be a valid contract. The next slide deals with all those essential elements of a valid contract. These elements are two parties, offer, acceptance, intention to create legal relation, lawful consideration, capacity of parties, free consent. agreement which is not declared to be void, and lawful object. We will discuss each of them individually. The first element which talks about offer and acceptance, as you all know, that if agreement is enforceable by law, then and only then it is a contract. And for making an agreement, there has to be two parties. Out of these two parties, one party is making an offer and the other party is accepting it. So offer and acceptance, they both must be present in the contract, in a valid contract. Second essential is intention to create legal relationship. So there are various kind of agreements. There are agreements which are of social nature. There are agreements which are of domestic nature. For example, if a husband is saying wife that if you will make good kheer for me today, I will gift you a gold necklace. Wife prepares kheer and after that husband doesn't give necklace. Can she sue? No. It was definitely an agreement but of social nature. So all the agreements don't turn out to be contracts. There has to be an intention to create legal obligation or legal relationship. Here I recall a landmark case of Balfour versus Balfour. It was also a social agreement kind of a social agreement. It was also a social agreement. What happened in the case of Balfour versus Balfour? In this case, husband agreed to pay monthly maintenance to wife and husband fails to pay this maintenance. The wife planned to sue her husband and it was held that she can't sue her husband. Why? Because it is not a contract, it was a social agreement. So your intention to create legal obligation is very much important. All the agreements of social nature or domestic nature cannot be called a contract. The next essential is lawful consideration. What is consideration? Consideration means something in return, quid pro quo. I would like to give a very basic example of one contract whereby Mr. A is selling his car to Mr. B for rupees 50,000. Now what is consideration in this? For Mr. A who is selling his car, for him 50,000 rupees is consideration. And for Mr. B who is buying a car, for him car is a consideration. Something that you get out of a contract, right? That is consideration. So consideration must be present. So it is not necessary that consideration must be in cash or consideration must be of the exact amount. No, not necessary. But yes, consideration must be real. It has to be lawful. So consideration must be present. The next essential element here is capacity of parties. See, Indian Contract Act has specified that which parties are competent to enter and which parties are not. A person is considered competent if he is 18 years of age, if he is of sound mind, and if he is not disqualified from contracting by any of law to which he is subject to. There are certain categories like insolvent, alien enemy, they are not competent to enter into a contract. So, in case if you are entering into a contract with a minor or a person of unsound mind or an alien enemy, then it doesn't turn out to be a valid contract. So, simply consideration and two parties are not important. It is also important to check out that the person with whom you are entering into a contract is a competent party or not. Very important essential it is. Legality of object. It is very much clear that the object of your contract must be lawful. Then what is unlawful? If it is forbidden by any law, it is causing injury to somebody, to somebody's property, right? Then it is unlawful. If you are entering into a contract of smuggling, if you are entering into a contract of kidnapping, then we can clearly say that the object is not lawful and hereby it doesn't turn out to be a valid contract. So, as I mentioned earlier also, that simply two parties consent consideration is not enough. If Mr. A is entering into a contract for kidnapping somebody's child for 50,000 rupees, then it is not a valid contract. Why? Because object is not lawful. The next essential is free consent. Now, what is free consent? The consent should be without any force. It should not be induced by coercion, undue influence, fraud, or misrepresentation. In one case, Mr. A is threatening Mr. B that if you will not sell me your house in 20 lakhs rupees, I will kidnap your son. And under that pressure, under that threat, obviously Mr. B is signing the contract. Is it a valid contract? Is it a free consent? No, it is not. So this kind of consent will also not result into a valid contract. Your consent must be absolutely free. It should not be induced by any other forces. The next essential element is agreement must not be expressly declared as void. There are certain agreements which are clearly, which Contract Act has expressly declared as void agreements, like agreement in restraint of marriage, agreement in restraint of trade, agreement in restraint of legal proceedings. So, if your contract is based on such kind of agreements, then once again it is not a valid contract. The next essential is certainty of terms. The contract's terms must be certain and not vague. And the last essential element is legal formalities. It means it is not necessary that all the contracts must be in writing, but if the nature of contract is such, or if under any legal provisions it is required that a contract must be in writing or it must be registered, then those all conditions must be fulfilled in order to make it a valid contract. So, students, today we have discussed what is contract and what are the essential elements required in order to make a valid contract. Thank you very much.